Hi, welcome to the CPD PowerPoint presentation from IRT Surveys. IRT have been trading now since January 2002, surveyed around 250,000 domestic properties, probably well over 200 university properties, a few hundred schools, and certainly dozens and dozens of office blocks up and down the country. We are the UK's largest infrared independent building surveyors, certainly in the world of infrared. We have raised venture capital, we've developed software, we've got about 10 or 11 offices around the country at the time of recording this presentation. So sit back, relax, and hopefully we will take you through this PowerPoint seamlessly and it will be of interest to you. Thank you. Let's begin with having a look at what IRT surveys have been doing for the last 15-16 years. We started off surveying flat roofs for defects to help clients identify sources of ingress and to help them proceed with optimized refurbishments. That very quickly grew into complete envelope surveys, so roofs, walls, windows, floors, etc. We then branched out into the housing sector, providing complete portfolio evaluations. Subsequently started writing our own software, mainly all market driven by our actual clients and trying to provide what they need to make intelligent decisions using enriched data to help unlock funding and actually accelerate the retrofit journey. Part of that process involves an audit where we can provide a really simple data set on a spreadsheet that just simply ranks and rates a portfolio, either domestic or commercial. If you look at the actual built environment in this country, around 40% of the world's CO2 comes from the built environment. Now we have very interesting legislation coming in England and Wales in April 2018 that says it's unlawful to rent or buy or lease a building that's an F or a G rated. That's currently estimated at 1 in every 3 buildings have an F or G rating. Now when you also consider about 60% of EPCs are inaccurate and date back to 2007, as of 2017, the EPCs are up for renewal. Certainly the early ones, the ones that were badly done, are up for renewal. So there are an awful lot of portfolio managers out there in for a horrible, nasty shock when those EPCs are redone and they find out that buildings they assumed were rentable, perhaps D and E rated, suddenly become an F and G when they're done properly by, say, an RICS surveyor this time instead of a £100 cowboy around the road. So very important that you take action and actually review your portfolio accurately today and you get impartial advice. So let's consider the refurbishment process today. How do you actually do that impartially? Finding those issues can involve destructive testing, which can be quite slow, it can be expensive, and often it's carried out with someone who has a vested interest in the outcome of the survey. So say for instance you cut holes in a roof and you use a roofing manufacturer to do that or a roofing contractor, the chances are they would quite like to tell you that you need a new roof because they can make money from selling you a new roof. So that's first and foremost, right at the start, a potential for disaster if that's the route you take. The second one, investing and improving. You have to be absolutely certain you're doing the right thing and are you delivering best value for your client. Money is tight, no one likes wasting it, and you need to make sure that your client receives an asset that is actually genuinely improved, that you are mitigating risk and that you actually identified and addressed the problem efficiently and effectively. Now let's consider the actual retrofit audit process. Before you begin to do a refurbishment or a retrofit plan, you have to gather data. That again can be quite slow and painful, but it has to be accurate. You've got to go and physically gather that data. You then have to make sense of that data and you've got to plan and spec the retrofit, appoint a team to manage it, and it all takes time. And obviously at the end, to prove success, you have to measure that. You have to measure the start and end point to know that it was actually a valid, worthwhile process. A major problem we've identified with our clients is that of missing data and people simply not trusting the data they have. If you don't have solid data that's robust, that you can trust and rely on, it means you can't present that to funders. It means you can't build a solid business case. That means your assets are at risk. It means your business is at risk because there is legislation coming that says you must comply with the minimum energy performance standards. That affects long-term value of your assets and just has an overall detrimental effect. So for us, one of the main things you need to do, our advice would be address that data right at the start of the journey before you do anything. Now the big dilemma for you, of course, if you're sitting watching this and you're an RICS surveyor or you're an asset manager or an investment portfolio manager, that risk resides with you. You're the one that's taking advice from manufacturers, from contractors. You're making decisions and you're putting your trust and faith in those people that they're telling you the truth. But ultimately that professional risk is yours. So you have to ask yourself, are you comfortable? At IRT, we've got a fairly radical solution to this problem. Our survey process is incredibly fast. When you're looking at housing stock, each camera we have is manned by a two-man team, and each team is doing around 500 homes per evening. So it can be a very, very, very quick process. We then analyse that information, again, automatically through our bespoke software that we've written ourselves. That happens in our head office in Dundee, and we then hand back to our clients a prioritised data set that says impartially, here is a list of properties, it's the truth, it's where you are today, and here's how you could make improvements. And it has the impact of those improvements very clearly spelled out on the actual deliverable. Where IRT surveys began was in the flat roofing industry. The image you're looking at on your screen right now shows a nice big flat roof on a shopping centre. The white area you can see in the centre of the photograph is an air conditioning unit, and the red and yellow is wet insulation caused by that air conditioning unit when it was maintained. There's obviously a defect around the base of it that's caused the insulation to be saturated. Now one of the key benefits of that process, that way of doing a flat roof survey, is you get an impartial image. If you cut core samples in 3 separate areas or 10 separate areas and you happen to hit the blue and purple area, you would have found bone dry insulation and you would have been unable to answer the question, why is that roof leaking? If you had taken core samples in the red area, your advice would have been, your roof is saturated, you need to replace the whole thing. The beauty of the infrared methodology is that you get a nice plain photograph that says strip out the red bits, and by the way it's 7.6 square meters, and you can actually embark on a refurbishment schedule that's optimized, and without, you're not wasting any money. You can prove to your client you're doing the right thing, and you can do a nice before and after and actually validate the refurbishment pictorially, which is always nice. When it comes to elevation surveys, it's quite simple to do a 5 or 6 story building from ground level with infrared. Key benefits here is you don't have any scaffolding costs. Again, the advice is impartial. It's nice and easy to repeat. So you can find things like delaminating render, you can find porous brickwork, moisture ingress, cold bridging, anything that affects the temperature of that building. It's very, very easy to see quickly with an infrared survey. We can also fly drones up the side of extremely complicated buildings, extremely high buildings, or indeed take the photographs from cherry pickers or adjacent buildings if drones aren't permitted. Back in 2009, IRT developed a system called IRT Carbon Dash. This exists on a website. You can go and play with it today. Basically what it is a nice graphic user interface, what programmers like to call a GUI, that enables you to interact with your building, either the front end to an SBEM or the front end to a SAP calculation. What you can see on the screen are 3 really simple speedometers, a dynamic EPC certificate, and 6 sliders that allow you to change the U value on the roof, the walls, the windows, the heating system, change the efficiency of the heating system, change the lighting, and change the draft proofing. When you click calculate changes in one of the boxes in the bottom right, you will see those 3 speedometers swing around and show you energy savings, CO2 savings, and monetary savings. You'll also notice the EPC certificate will jump from, say, a G to a D depending on whether what you've selected actually has a tangible impact upon the EPC rating. So it's a nice way to satisfy yourself that the retrofit you're doing will comply with the minimum energy performance standards. Let's have a quick look at 3 projects that involve portfolio evaluation from IRT surveys. The first, Royal Holloway University, appointed us to look at 88 separate buildings for them, and the deliverable there was basically a ranked and rated spreadsheet that said there is the worst building you have, there's the worst element of it, and there's how much money, carbon and kilowatts you can save from replacing or upgrading each of those elements. So what that enabled the university to do was actually prioritise a retrofit programme. Now we've done similar projects for Bath University, Manchester Metropolitan, Edinburgh, UWE, Middlesex, Loughborough, Napier, St Andrews. It's a fairly common practice in that specific sector. For Edinburgh City Council, we did a portfolio review, exactly the same as Holloway's, for 90 separate schools. In both projects, together with the actual overall spreadsheet analysis, with all the numerical analysis of retrofits, they actually received about a 50-page report on each building that detailed all the defects as well as the energy savings that could be delivered by doing a retrofit. Scottish Housing Federation, we managed to survey 60,000 homes from Orkney and Shetland right down to the Scottish borders and out to the Outer Hebrides. Urban, rural, new, old, didn't really make much difference. That was partially funded by the Scottish Government in phase 1. The first 10,000 were free to SFHA members. The following 50,000 were heavily subsidised by Sheffield Insulation, who very kindly sponsored the programme. That actually leveraged our about 30 odd million pounds into those 60,000 homes, all built into an online platform called the Carbon Portal, where housing associations could actually share best practice and register what they did, what funding they got, how tenants reacted. It was a really fantastic project. Other issues we can identify, particularly in these housing examples, in the middle of your screen you're looking at condensation in blue and purple in a nursery. The bottom left you are looking at delaminating render in blue, which is very easy to see. It's sub £20 a house, provided we get volume. Above 500 houses, that sort of number, we can actually get the price down as low as that. But that means no scaffolding, no health and safety, no hammer tests, impartial advice, and you can literally see it in bright blue where we can say that is 4.2 square meters of delaminating render, and that's what you tender. On the right hand side of the screen you'll see an after image of external wall insulation. If you do a retrofit program and you do evaluate, say, 1,000 buildings, and you go and employ someone to bolt EWI onto, say, 100 of those buildings, it's not a huge expense to say, please go and do the infrared surveys again at the end. What you can see at the right there in red and yellow is actually moisture getting in at the corners of that building and soaking into the insulation. Now that building's only 3 months post-install, so that's the kind of thing you can avoid and identify whilst you're in the defect liability period and get repaired at the contractor's expense. So while it's a small, cheap defect, get it addressed, saves the contractor money in the long term, but ultimately saves your assets and saves the tenant complaining about a cold, damp house in, say, 9 months' time when it's all saturated. So let's consider a full portfolio analysis. What does that process look like? Right at the start of the process for us, it's about gathering data, either via you exporting a CSV file from your current asset register or emailing an Excel spreadsheet. Doesn't really matter for us. What we do is we take that data as best as you've got it, we fill in the blanks with our dynamic templates, and we start with a decent data set. We then process that through our software, which is a desktop review, and we can actually report back to you and say, okay, this is where we think you are based on what you've uploaded and what we've assumed. You can then interact with that data and start playing around with it. Then identify priority buildings from that analysis and reporting and say, do you know what, we are concerned about this 10% or this 80%, or we're concerned about these 3 houses. Please go and gather more data. That's when we deploy one of our survey teams to physically go and gather data on site. We then take that data and augment it right back into step 1 of that process. And it's a fairly iterative process of that again and again until you've got the perfect data set. Does that exist? Is that a dream? I don't know, but it's certainly best practice, and it's a blooming good start if you're going on a retrofit journey to establish exactly where you are and what the destination should be, and plan the most efficient route to get from A to B.